All American and Israeli assets and interests in the Middle East have become legitimate targets. No red lines after this aggression. That is not a tweet from an anonymous account. That is not propaganda from a fringe group. Those are the exact words of a senior Iranian official broadcast to the entire world on day one of this war. And today, 11 days in, Iran is not backing down. Iran is escalating. Iran is threatening to cut off 20% of the world's oil supply. Iran's drones are hitting Amazon data centers in Dubai. Iran's missiles are striking Saudi Arabia's oil fields. Iran's parliament speaker just posted publicly that his country is definitely not looking for a ceasefire. And the UN Secretary General just stood before the Security Council and warned the world of one thing: we are being pulled to the brink. Welcome. Subscribe right now because in the next several minutes, we're going to map exactly how this conflict is spreading beyond Iran, beyond the Middle East, and beyond anything Washington initially planned for. 11 days ago, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. They assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. They struck nuclear facilities, missile sites, naval infrastructure, and the command centers of the most powerful military in the region. Trump called it a success. He told reporters that Iran had no navy, no air force, no radar, almost nothing left. And then Iran fired 500 ballistic missiles and nearly 2,000 drones at targets across 8 countries. Iran's retaliatory strikes have targeted U.S. embassies and military installations in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Oman, and Jordan. A drone believed to have been launched by Hezbollah struck a British Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. NATO forces shot down an Iranian drone near Turkey. Cyprus, Turkey, NATO territory. Iranian weapons are now reaching the borders of the Atlantic Alliance. That is not a regional conflict anymore. That is a conflict knocking on the door of a mutual defense treaty that obligates 29 countries to respond. Like this video if you want to understand the real stakes of what is happening right now. Now let's talk about Iran's strategy, because Iran is not fighting randomly. Iran has a plan, and that plan is built on one devastating weapon: economic pain. A top Iranian official in an exclusive CNN interview warned that the government is prepared for a long war with the U.S. and signaled willingness to keep attacking Gulf countries to pressure them into convincing Trump to step back. The senior advisor to the Supreme Leader's office ruled out diplomacy entirely and said the war would only end through economic pain. Economic pain, that is Iran's doctrine right now. Not military victory, not defeating the most powerful armed forces in human history on the battlefield. Economic strangulation. And the targets Iran is choosing tell you everything about how calculated this strategy is. Iran struck UAE-based Amazon data centers directly targeting U.S. concerns about AI infrastructure in the Gulf. Qatar shut down its liquefied natural gas exports, 20% of the global LNG market, after Iranian drones hit key facilities. Oman's Duqm port complex was struck in successive attacks. Iran's surviving leadership is counting on these reputation costs to force Gulf rulers to lobby Trump for a ceasefire. 20% of global LNG gone, not disrupted, shut down, and Iran is telling those Gulf states, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, that their territories are now legitimate targets as long as they host American forces. The Gulf Cooperation Council gave Iran ironclad assurances, repeatedly and explicitly, that their territories would not be used to launch attacks against Iran. Iran is striking them anyway. The consequence of that is seismic, because those Gulf states are the ones Iran needs to mediate any exit from this conflict. By bombing them, Iran is burning the very bridges it would need to walk toward a ceasefire. And yet, it continues. Despite Iranian President Pezeshkian ordering the armed forces to stop striking Gulf neighbors, the Revolutionary Guard continued the attacks, exposing a dangerous leadership rift inside the Iranian government itself. That detail is one of the most alarming facts to emerge from this entire war. The president of Iran ordered the military to stop. The Revolutionary Guard ignored him. The civilian government and the armed forces of Iran are not moving in the same direction. And when a nuclear-adjacent state fighting a war against the United States has a fractured command structure, the margin for catastrophic miscalculation shrinks to nearly zero. Share this video right now with someone who needs to understand what is actually at stake. This is the story that determines the next decade of world history. Let's keep going. Because there is one more actor in this conflict that has barely made the front pages. One actor whose moves in the last 11 days may matter more than anything happening in Tehran or Washington: China. China sent a special envoy to the Middle East last week to mediate a ceasefire. China is watching a conflict that has shut down 20% of global LNG exports, threatened the Strait of Hormuz through which most of Asia's energy supply flows, and destabilized every shipping lane connecting the Gulf to the Indian Ocean. China is not a spectator. China is the world's largest oil importer. Every dollar that oil rises, every day the Strait of Hormuz stays under threat, every tanker that reroutes around the Gulf, all of it hits the Chinese economy directly. And Trump is scheduled to meet Xi Jinping in Beijing in the coming days for what was already going to be one of the most consequential diplomatic encounters of the decade, now happening in the middle of a shooting war that is disrupting China's energy supply chain in real time. The UN Secretary General stood before the Security Council and said this: "Everything must be done to prevent further escalation." He called for de-escalation and an immediate cessation of hostilities, warning that the alternative is a potential wider conflict with grave consequences for civilians and regional stability. A wider conflict from the Secretary of the United Nations, not a think tank, not an opposition politician, the man whose job is to tell the world when the room is genuinely on fire. Analysts at the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies put it with devastating clarity. Wars reach critical thresholds at which each side becomes so committed to its sacrifices and its narrative that finding an exit becomes nearly impossible. There are signs that threshold is approaching. Iran has declared it will fight until the enemy is decisively defeated. The U.S. Senate failed to invoke war powers to restrain Trump. Iran's proxies are actively engaging. Every passing day narrows the corridor of possibility. And Trump's response to all of this: he told a reporter this week that the war is very complete, pretty much. And then, hours later, the Pentagon announced the most intense day of bombing in the entire conflict. Very complete, most intense day yet, both true at the same time from the same administration within the same 24 hours. This is day 11. The Strait of Hormuz is under constant threat. A NATO airbase has been struck. Iran's command structure is fracturing. China is scrambling to mediate. The UN is warning of a wider war. And the world is holding their breath, waiting to find out whether the next escalation is the one that crosses the line nobody comes back from. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think there is still a diplomatic exit from this war, or has the window already closed? Subscribe to this channel for every major update as this story develops, and share this with someone who needs the full picture. We will see you in the next one.